10 News Conference starts right now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gene Valicenti. Happy Thanksgiving. This is a special edition of 10 News Conference for the holiday. We've assembled a panel of our reporters. Joining me is Brian Crandall, Alison, Bologna, and NBC 10's Tamara Sacharczyk. We're going to do the fighting and arguing for you at this table, so that hopefully you can enjoy peace at yours. All right, let's get right into it. Brian, the governor is giving a sweet deal to members of Council 94. That's the largest state workers union. $3,000 for getting a vaccine as an incentive. The governor's getting hammered on this.
Well, and I think the criticism comes in a number of different ways. The way I see it is that for months he's been saying we don't need to give anybody incentives to get the shot, that the vaccination rates in Rhode Island are so high, where over 93% of adults have gotten at least one shot. The governor keeps pointing to that as a reason not to do incentives, not to do mandates. And now within Council 94's upcoming contract are two $1,500 bonuses for getting the vaccination. And he has also been saying for months that they were negotiating potentially mandating the vaccine with that union, and instead of a mandate now, it's now an incentive. Now, I've also heard the argument from another union leader that they gave a $3,000 bonus to the Providence Teachers Union, which McKee's team negotiated as well, but that wasn't tied to anything. So at least this union leader says they're getting something in return for the bonus. Now, if it wasn't tied to anything, would it have been as controversial? But the fact that the bonus is tied to something, then I think is sparking that controversy. And the other state unions are now anticipating that they'll get this as well because their contracts are coming up. There's a group of them that represent thousands of them as well, and they're all anticipating.
Well, I just spoke to Richard Ferruccio with the Correctional Officers Union. That's where we're starting.
That's where we're starting, exactly.
Yeah, that's where we're starting.
Then what? Who's paying for it? And why is this happening? The average Rhode Islander isn't getting this sort of deal, right? It's a sweet deal for the unions.
And there are people who lost their jobs because they didn't get vaccinated. A lot of people in the healthcare industry lost their jobs, and now you have these state workers that are getting paid, essentially, to get vaccinated.
Well, I think part of it, too, is the union angle of it. Where is it that Governor McKee is not trying to tip the apple cart with the unions the year before an election and is now giving them bonuses? And when he went with the mandate on the healthcare workers, when people criticized that, people in the healthcare field who didn't want to get vaccinated, he turned it to, well, the hospitals wanted that, the nursing homes wanted that, I'm doing what they wanted. And then when it came time to enforce the mandate with the state healthcare workers at Eleanor Slater and the Veterans Home, he kind of backpedaled a little bit and let them keep their jobs beyond the deadline.
Because of staffing shortages, he claims.
Said it was a safety issue. I can't lose all those people, when before he said it's a safety issue if healthcare workers are not vaccinated. So I think the trouble comes in that it seems like it's hypocritical to do some of these things.
You're treating state workers differently than you're treating private workers.
Now,
I think it's going to hurt him in the gubernatorial campaign.
Well,
absolutely.
Well, it's going to hurt him. In public opinion, he's been getting hammered on the radio, but he may be looking at 3,800 votes plus a spouse, plus a mother and father. That could be critical in a very, very tight primary. He might be able to lock up 20,000, 30,000 votes with this. By the way, we're all vaxxed here. So that would be $12,000 on the table. That looks pretty good. We've done that.
Yeah, I want a contract like that. Do you?
I want one there.
We're going to get our contract.
We should get Michael Downey to negotiate for us. He's pretty good. Now, health care. We were talking about the mandates. The governor said to state hospital workers, these are people who are state workers, report to him, you better get the vaccine or else. Some of them thumbed their nose at him. And you know what? They won because he's not getting rid of them. Because he says, I can't afford to get rid of them. There's such a critical shortage of healthcare workers. I know they got one over on me, but he can't afford to get rid of them. That's happening in the private sector where the nursing homes are concerned.
Right, but nursing homes, there's a ton of shortages because of the people not getting vaccinated, where like Brian was saying for Eleanor Slater, he was saying like, okay, well, staffing shortages, we won't do this right away. But then when it comes to the actual private nursing homes, a ton of people lost their jobs, and right now they are really struggling to get workers. They have over 1,900 job openings right now, and we're talking about nurses, CNAs. So how can you stay functioning when you have that big of a shortage of jobs?
Well, I think one of your reports, they were saying that some of them might close. They're that critical?
Yep. They're already closing down units and beds. Some of them aren't accepting in new patients. So, I mean, if you have to get into a nursing home, good luck, because some of them have already stopped taking in new people.
No matter what the price tag. Right.
Now, the argument I've heard from, we did a story last week on the hospitals are saying, if you don't have an emergency, don't come to the emergency room. Because, again, we have staffing shortages. Now, they'll argue, and the health department is arguing, that a very small amount of that has to do with the vaccine mandate, that 97 or 95% of healthcare workers ended up getting vaccinated, and it has more to do with pandemic burnout, that they're losing people to other industries that I think, a lot of other fields are losing as well, right? Correct. And so, but there definitely is a problem, and they're feeling that strain all throughout the system.
Now, you've been to all these press conferences the governor holds, and many of them with Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott. Sometimes she says one thing, he says another. What's the dynamic between the two of those? Because sometimes governors clean the house. Is she untouchable?
I think at this point, if she was going to be let go, then that would have already happened. I think, what you're referring to is, I think maybe like a month or so ago, it seemed like there was a difference on vaccine mandates and who we're going to tell to get, and I think she had, I talked to some of her people after that. I think they tried to say that it wasn't what maybe some people made it out to be. But, the interesting thing is, remember when he took office, it seemed like he was criticizing the way the health department was running things. And he came in, and interestingly enough, heading into the political part of it, whenever he takes criticism and is asked a critical question of something these days, he turns it to, remember when I took over, our vaccination rates were the lowest in the country. Our infection rates were the highest. Look where we are now, and that's because I redirected the ship. I told them to get more of that vaccine out. And when he took over back in March, it seemed like a lot of that was directed at the health department, that they're moving too slow. But interestingly, right after he took over, I noticed a small thing not long after where she came up to him, Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott, like put her hand on his shoulder, and they were like kind of chummy and stuff like that.
Were the cameras rolling at the time?
I don't know. I don't know about that. They were there, but it was before a press conference when she showed up. I don't know what the dynamic is now.
Well, remember, she's a Raimondo person, right? Raimondo put her in. There was a lot of stress between Raimondo and McKee, so maybe that's still shaking itself out.
Well, the cameras were rolling when you asked Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos about giving the sweet deal to the state workers. And at first she answered it, let's give peace a chance, I think she said. It's a $3,000 incentive. They're going to like the carrot and stick approach. She speaks for the administration. They joined at the hip, those two.
Well, he made it that way, whether he liked it or not. Remember, going back to the Raimondo days, he was not happy that he was cut out of the loop when she was the governor. Now, remember, in Rhode Island, they don't run as a ticket, the governor and lieutenant governor. But it looks like, technically they're not going to run as a ticket, but he kind of hitched his wagon with Sabina Matos when he picked her, because he handpicked her and said, I want someone who's a teammate. And so whether or not...
And they've been inseparable since. We're talking not just the first 2 weeks. We're talking months, right? Months.
But when you followed up, she said, I don't want to answer for him.
She said when he comes back, because he's away on vacation.
You answer for him. You're together all the time.
So she started to answer it.
Right.
She started to answer it. And again, as you said, with that vaccine bonus, let's try a carrot and a stick. And I pointed out what we just talked about a minute ago. Well, he didn't want to give a carrot to other people in terms of incentives. We kept asking him for months, are you going to give incentives to people when other states were doing it? Even Massachusetts are doing lotteries. They're giving out college scholarships. I think, here in Rhode Island, he said, we're not going to do that. We gave some money to nonprofits. And Gene, you were handing out some scratch tickets at the Dunkin' Donuts there too.
That's a funny story, the way that came about. I wanted to do $100 worth of scratch tickets. That's an incentive. In the end, they wound up doing one scratch ticket here. So it was more of a thank you than an incentive. Tamara Sacharczyk, you've done the nursing homes. You've also done unemployment stories, right?
A lot of unemployment.
Mr. DLT was on with you.
Yes, well done.
We have fraud.
Yep.
We don't even know the final number of how much these characters ripped us off.
How many of us around here? I mean, I was a victim of it.
You were a victim. You were too.
Were you?
Yeah, I was.
Not that I know.
I was not. Brian and I are
So
clear for now.
50% just here.
Yeah, they said I didn't work here anymore. They put in a claim for me.
Mario too.
What's going on?
So they were still trying to claw some of that money back, and they have made a lot of progress. Millions of more dollars from August than the last time I checked in September, I want to say. So they are making progress with clawing that money back. I think the banks are getting more into knowing how to do this process, because I think at first there was a lot of confusion, and now they're starting to really figure out who's doing the fraud, how to get the money back to Rhode Island. But unemployment, what's interesting about this is they say the unemployment rate has been dropping, yet people still aren't going back to work. Yeah. And I spoke to an economics professor from URI the other day who was saying that income in 2020 was higher than it's been in Rhode Island in years. And he thinks that's because of all of the money that the government has given people during the pandemic. So people are just saving this
Oh,
up and they're
PPP,
able to,
et cetera.
yeah.
Right.
This leads to another conversation about inflation. We're just handing out money but that we printed, and this is driving prices up. But Alison, you're right. You can't get anybody to work in a restaurant these days. You know, at one point when they were doing the $600 a week incentive, that added up to almost $60,000 a year.
There are so many restaurants still closed too because they don't have the staff to keep the doors open.
Yeah.
A lot of really popular restaurants too. I was on Broadway yesterday. The Grange is still closed. Every other Dunkin' Donuts has a help wanted sign up too, and it's not just restaurants. Obviously, it's across the board. It's a real problem because people aren't getting services. So we're talking about, you know, the want businesses, not necessarily the need businesses, but we're seeing it in the need businesses with the nursing homes and everywhere else. Then you have the ripple down effect. Caregivers, other people, stress on families. I don't know how much longer. You know, we talk about the Great Resignation. How much longer can this last, though? Don't people need to show up like we do and go to work?
And the argument on the other side is that people are just looking for better jobs. Right?
Right.
That they're looking, they don't want to work,
Yes.
that they don't want to work in the service industry anymore, that they've realized, and you know, I think you see this in other fields too. It's like you see people who may have been able to work at home during the pandemic. They get flexible hours. They're getting better pay and better benefits.
But for
and
how
maybe
long,
people
right?
are seeing that the
Exactly.
grass is greener on the side. But you're right. When does that all kind
And you
of
can't
shake
just
out?
get rid of those minimum wage jobs because keep in mind, college isn't for everyone, and some of the
Right.
higher skill jobs isn't for everyone unless you want to bury yourself in student debt. So it's like for some people, those minimum wage jobs that lead to these supervisor positions can actually be really good for them
Yes.
depending on who you are.
Right. And can some of these small businesses afford to
No,
pay
they can't.
significantly more
They're
than
closing.
what they were paying?
Right.
So
or
many
cutting
of them
back
are closing,
hours, or
which is basically closing. Right.
And you don't get the services that you want. People can't. You don't have people to answer the phone when people try to call in and stuff like that.
And I was hearing too that the supply chain issues in general are also putting a lot of businesses under right now. So even if they are getting the workers back and they're doing okay on that end of everything, now they have these supply chain issues that down the road they're saying, can we stay open if we can't get the supplies?
And with
That's
the price of gas, you're going to see surcharges coming. The people who cut grass say, I need this more gasoline in the
all
lawnmower. I got to charge
passed
you.
along to you, the consumer,
This will
at
all
the
be,
end of the
you're
day.
right. This will be passed along to the next governor, whomever that person might be. It could be Governor McKee, or it could be one of 4 or 5 challengers. Let's just do a quick one on this. Nellie Gorbea has been kind of quiet since she announced. Haven't heard much from her other than she put a poll out saying she's neck and neck with McKee and everybody else is also
She got a poll. I also got a direct Twitter message, campaign message as well. You know, it's interesting. It's kind of that quiet time. You're going into the holidays. Some of the candidates announced a couple months ago. Dan McKee has not.
Yeah.
You know, and so you're kind of in that quiet time, and it's interesting because you look at it and you know some of the names. I was just trying to, before the show, think about to elections past where some of the people who became governor, maybe you had no idea this far out. I mean, I don't know, Gene, maybe you have a different recollection. Like 20 years ago, Don Kachiri, this far out, did anybody know, or was he a household name at the time and was going to become
In the business
governor?
world, I think, yes.
Right. And it's just an interesting dynamic that you have basically a sitting governor being challenged in a primary now because it was considered. It's a different dynamic with Gina Raimondo leaving to take a cabinet position. You have somebody who's going to be in the position a year and a half come primary time next year.
And Governor McKee wants to focus on being governor. As long as he's, in charge with power, he wants to telegraph that, not necessarily I'm running. At some point, I'm the governor, which is why he's fighting with the leadership over releasing some of those CARE dollars, the more than $1 billion. He wants to start spending that, but they don't want to let him.
Right, and it doesn't look like they're coming back for a special session. He wanted to get it out
Right.
the door, and he's trying to be, I'm the champion of small business. We're trying to get that money out the door. And again, it's an interesting dynamic because Dan McKee is more of a moderate Democrat, and you've got Seth Magaziner and Nellie Gorbea kind of on the left. And so Rhode Island in the governor's office tends to look at more moderates as who they want. It's obviously a blue state, but if you look at the history, Gina Raimondo was the first Democrat who was elected governor in 20
Right, we've had Republicans for a long time.
And even some of the Republicans have positioned themselves as moderate Republicans.
Right. And he's doing well in a poll. He came out with 59% approval rating in that morning consult poll that came out this week, where Gina Raimondo had typically been at the bottom of the governor's rankings in the country. He was 11th and second among Democrats. So
part of that is timing, though.
Right.
He came in at an easier time, for sure.
And again, I think that's what you hear from him is I turned things around. Now, whether that was just
When
because
the
of the
vaccine
timing
came out
and somebody else could have done that as well, that's the argument he's going to make. Whether that carries for the next year is COVID numbers. We'll see what happens with the COVID numbers in the next couple of months as they go up. And if people will remember that a year from now.
That's a really good point.
This leads us to Helena Folk. She's another Democrat running. Now, she came out, made a splash with a video, but I haven't heard from her.
Well, she had a rough start, remember, because again,
now.
as a Democrat, she got hit from the left because she made campaign donations to Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, and had to come out and basically apologize. And again, I think this is kind of that quiet time where around the holidays and things ramp up again later on. But that
she's going to need to speak up now with the
but again, a
crisis.
business background may help her. You know, if you look at that again, you mentioned Don Kacheri came from the business world, and she's a Democrat who came from the business world. Sometimes coming from one of those other state general offices doesn't really help. Gene Raimondo did it, but before that, Bruce Sundlun came from the business world. Don Kacheri came from the business world. It's like they don't really come from within state government.
Just getting back to Helena for a minute. Now listen, she's listed as president of CVS Pharmacies from 2014 to 2018. We're taping on a Wednesday. Just yesterday, we got big news of a verdict that went against CVS for its role in the opioid crisis. The Ohio jury went after CVS, and they're on the hook along with Walmart and Walgreens. Now, as a candidate, she ought to come out and make her role clear, if she had any role, what was going on in the corner pharmacies. She may be the retail person. She may not be, but where is she addressing this?
I think you need to hear from her because she's willing to talk about tobacco, right?
She wants to talk about the care card. Where were you?
Absolutely. And this is a precedent-setting case. I have been covering these opioid stories now for almost a year, and it is incredibly heartbreaking to hear some of these people's stories, and they're not getting the help they need. Despite millions and millions going into recovery resources, you're still seeing pills doled out. So this is a real problem. And Peter Nerona, the Attorney General, is not going to sit back and take this. He is very aggressive when it comes to prosecuting these cases.
It was an Ohio law that applied, public nuisance. They felt CVS was a public nuisance. It worked there. It hasn't worked in other jurisdictions. But as listed as president of CVS Pharmacies, what was your role? And if it was somebody else, come out and say that. But this is, you're running for governor now. Want to hear from you. The spotlight is on. All right. We're going to have a mayor.
So that's an invitation for an interview.
That's an invitation. Absolutely. You're welcome. We have a space right here at the table. You relax. Peace at your table. We'll do the arguing for you. Let's begin with Columbus. He's always a good guest for any holiday, isn't he?
Depending on who you ask, Gene.
Do you know where the Columbus statue is these days, Tammy? He's in a warehouse locked up on Harris Avenue.
Right. And how long ago did they say they were going to sell the statue or donate the statue to a museum? It's been a while, right?
It's been a while. They just had a meeting and they said, give us more time to decide.
Why does it take so long to decide what to do with the statue?
Well, because nobody wants to touch him. If he's in the closet, leave him there.
It's a lightning rod. Punt it down the road as long as you can.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to last for the next 5 years.
Right.
Oh, please no.
And you know, that meeting that you were talking about, it was the Providence Board of Park Commissioners, because I guess they're going to decide what to do with it. Mayor Jorge Alorza is on the board. And the leading recommendation that came out of a special committee was to sell it and then reinvest the money in the community. And the head of that committee thought maybe they've heard all kinds of different estimates. It's a bronze statue of $300,000 and $1 million.
Right.
But then Mayor Alorza also said, like, well, could we also look at, like, do we have to sell it to the highest bidder? Can we have a say in who we sell it to, like a different group, like an Anglo-American group?
Johnston wants it.
I feel like we're making it way more controversial than it has to be.
Cranston would take it
Should
too.
they have to pay
Mayor
together?
Hopkins says, I'll take it.
Do you get into a bidding war?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
You know, it's going to be that'll be on the next plate.
Do what Maine did. Put the names in the hat. Take out one of the towns. Figure it out that way.
Richmond, you won. The next mayor's going to have to deal with this, make a decision. Maybe they'll kick it down the can. And you know what? Three of these people have come forward to run for mayor of Providence. They're trying to set them apart. Believe it or not, Brett Smiley, who's always been known as a progressive, he's the most centrist candidate of all. Isn't that surprising? You ask him, are you defund the police? Absolutely not.
He gives you a straight answer.
Gives you a straight, absolutely not.
Right. And the interesting, East Side is, again, how well is that going to play in a Democratic primary, which one would assume will basically decide the election against Nerva LaFortune and Gonzalo Cuervo. And again, he worked for Gene Raimondo. Is that going to help him or is that going to hurt him? Or is it going to be better off to be like Councilwoman LaFortune, who's like, I'm working on the council, I'm a progressive, or and it's just again an interesting dynamic and so far out.
Right.
We know who he is, but do you think the average person in Providence knows who he is? He's more of an insider, I think, with the Raimondo administration.
Yeah, he's going to have to spend a lot of advertising money. He ran before. But you've got Gonzalo Cuervo came up. Now I asked Gonzalo Cuervo. He says no, but he's for reimagining the police, which a lot of people say is the same thing. And I asked Nerva LaFortune. She is defund the police because she's on the record voting against the whole city budget because the police department's traditional budget wasn't defunded. She'll say, oh, but I'm for funding public safety. Isn't that the same thing? Well, we'll leave that up to the voters to decide. But the point is that a lot of these progressive Democrats were talking up defund the police. And now they're running away from it,
Right.
particularly with what we just saw happen in Wisconsin.
Well, also the violence in
And
the
that's going to
city.
be a big topic, I think, for Providence mayor, especially since the past, what has it been, 6 months to a year, where we've just seen violent acts
Homicide,
after. I mean,
homicide,
I'm here on
homicide.
weekends in the middle of the night and hearing that scanner go off. It's like you can barely keep track of everything that's going on, and you're just picturing these police officers running to event.
And I think some of the politicians will go back to a year ago and say, well, defund the police meant different things to different people.
That's what
I didn't
they've been
mean-
saying, yeah.
Right, I didn't mean take it all away. Let's
Right,
move
we're
some
gonna
of the money to
invest in
social
this,
but now I meant
Right,
this.
let's
Hold
move
on.
money to some of the social services. or-
We all went through the summer of unrest. We all watched all the news. Are we all clear on what defund the police means and meant?
It depends on who you
Yeah,
ask.
I guess.
You have an idea?
Allison's right, it does. It depends on
I
who you
think
ask.
we know what it means. I think different people tried to claim it meant different things. So I think, yes, defund the police means take all the money away. But I think different politicians will say, I mean, well, not totally defund.
Right.
Like
We're
Joe
gonna
Biden
add
will say,
resources
Invest in
to
these
social
programs
services.
as opposed to, yeah.
And there were some politicians who, by the way, went even further, abolish the police. And we had some people in Rhode Island who have tweeted that out. They're
And
on the
I
record
think
as well.
they're finding now that among the general population, that is not a popular consensus. Again, going back to Governor McKee, he was saying, like, I think this is, he said from the start, I think this is the time we need to stick to police. And I think that, again, is a message that has worked, and people do not want to abolish the police because, again, it just practically speaking, then what do you do?
I think people would rather hear invest in police training than defund the police.
Well, at least they're talking about mental health right now because it is a real problem. So that's a positive. At least everybody's on the same page with folks need to be trained better to deal with mental health crises. When I was working for the Providence Center, too, doing stories with them, they hired social workers way back under Hugh Clement's time to go in police cruisers and respond. So we're not locking people up, but instead getting them treatment in behavioral health. Now they're finally going back to that, not just in Providence, but elsewhere, which hopefully will help. But that's not defund the police.
Right.
That's actually boost them up and give them more resources.
Well, and so many of the calls they go out on have to do with mental health. And we've covered some
Absolutely.
situations
Oh,
just
yeah.
this
It's,
week
again,
in terms of a
heartbreaking.
police shooting in Warwick where, you know, the call was for a suicidal man. And again, that you're seeing more of that happen where so many of the calls, domestics, have to do with mental health issues. And should police officers have better training on mental health or have a mental
have
health
social
person
workers
with
with
them
them. Right.
in
Yeah.
tandem, and that would require spending more money,
Well,
not less.
we just saw a couple of cases this week. You had one in Fall River, one in Warwick. Now, the Warwick police say, you know, we showed up. This man was deranged. He came at us, pointed a gun at us. You know, some people say, pointed a gun at you?
Right.
What do you expect the cops to do? What would you expect a social worker to do if he pointed a gun at the
But there may be a
social
way
worker?
to de-escalate the situation before that happens, is what they're trying to say.
Well, if there is, it hasn't come about in years. I mean, in New York City, they had the Eleanor Bumpers case. This goes back.
But we haven't
this
been
goes back
investing in it
years.
enough, is what folks will say. So we'll see.
Right, and they would say, is there an alternative to showing up with your guns drawn
That's
and
right, and
armored
the sirens going,
Right.
armored
which triggers
vehicles, and you
everything.
surround the
As opposed to
Okay.
social workers showing up
Well,
first.
that is a
during the call.
case-by-case basis.
Again,
You know.
there's no easy solutions to it.
Right.
We've just got about a minute left. Unresolved issues. We haven't gotten the buses out of Kennedy Plaza. We're still fighting over bike paths. Take one. Do you ride the buses? Are you on the bus? No.
No, and I don't ride bikes
know what
either.
you-
And do you ride a bike?
No, I do
Then
not.
stay out of Providence.
However, every time I see a bike path, I get semi-terrified when I'm driving.
lot of drivers do,
Reminds
to
me of
be
driving
fair.
in Boston again.
Look, the bike paths, I see them. I don't see anybody on them.
That's
So
true.
a big investment. I don't see any
It
bikers.
depends on whether or not you're in an urban area.
So the one
I
they
will
just
argue.
opened, the one
And
that,
the season
the
too.
controversial
Yeah.
one they just opened
Yeah.
on South Water Street. The
Right.
day I was there was people zooming by on bikes because I was standing right by. I think again, they claim that's an urban right. If you're a suburbanite like some of us are, then maybe it's not as big of a thing. But in the cities, people either don't have cars, gas prices going up. Gene, I don't know, maybe ride the
Yeah,
bike
maybe
more.
we
Listen,
should all
We're all
invest in
TV, hold
bikes.
on. We're all TV people. You know what this means. I've got the wrap. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you, and thanks for joining us for this edition of 10 News Conference.